good afternoon, and absolutely delighted to be here and talk about two things that I care deeply about: leadership development as well as diversity and inclusion. So now I started working 30 years ago. Maybe some of you were not even born then. But 30 years ago, the world of work and the workplace was quite different. For one, we didn't have mobile phones, right? There was a time where people actually survived and worked without mobile phones. We didn't have laptops. I worked on a big desktop. I worked in a large multinational bank. And we had cubicles, and the size of your cubicles became bigger as you moved up in the corporate ladder. Bosses were on a different floor. There were lots of men and very few women. And those of us who were there were quite grateful just to be there. And we didn't know these words, diversity and inclusion. PWD, LGBTQ, no idea. And leadership was about getting things done quickly, correctly, and ideally without hurting anybody, right? And we all survived in that world, but that world changed very, very quickly. You know, just to give you an idea, today workspaces look very different. In fact, offices look a little bit like cafes. Cafes double up as offices. There's lots more color at the workplace in very different ways. We are talking diversity and inclusion. We are talking about getting more and more people. And in fact, today, we have the massive width of generations at the workplace. And leadership has also evolved with it. And that's what I've seen in 20 years of doing leadership development. And what is the future going to look like? Right? So we're talking about how do I get a future-ready workforce? Any idea what the future could look like? Anybody thinks it's going to look like this? I think not, right? We will still continue to have human beings at the workplace. We will still continue to have a very diverse workforce, but the leadership and leadership challenges are looking different and going to get different. In fact, we have no clue about the future. And some of you would be familiar with these terms, right? We had a VUCA world a few years ago, then it became the Barney world, and now I came across something called TACI, which is turbulent, accidental, chaotic, and inimical. So the future doesn't look very pleasant and promising. In fact, I heard about yet another one called Shiva, where the H stands for horrible, and it's about everything is going to be destroyed. So if this is the future we are heading to, what should leadership look like in this future? And I'm working on my fourth book now. Interestingly, it's a collaboration with my husband, who's been a managing director and a CEO for 10 years. So I take diversity and inclusion into the home as well, as I'm collaborating with my husband. And we have interviewed 50 CEOs for this book so far. And one thing that they all say is going to be a big challenge now and in the future is to do with people. How do we recruit, retain, grow, develop people in this chaotic, accidental, turbulent world? And therefore, what leadership looks like today is different and has to be different from what it looked like earlier. Very interesting research I came across, and this is by a lady called Sylvia Ann Hewitt, who wrote a book on executive presence. And her book came out sometime in 2012. And I found this interesting, that in terms of how leadership traits have changed between 2012 and 22 in just 10 years, 2 new aspects have made their way into this list. And this is from her recent survey: inclusiveness and respect for others. Things we did not equate with leadership earlier. So my work, as I said, is both with leadership development and diversity and inclusion, and I work with a variety of organizations across sectors. And today, when I do coaching or facilitation or consult with organizations, the challenges that leaders speak about are different. Right? Some of the things they ask: how do I get Gen Z employees to be productive and loyal? Any of you face this? Yeah. I have a 22-year-old daughter. She started work last year. She's very, very different in terms of mindset from when I started work 30 years ago. Right? And I run a program called How to Manage a Multi-Generational Workforce, and it's fascinating to hear about the challenges both the generations have. So leaders are grappling. 40% of our workforce are these young people whose outlook is very different. How do I get the best out of them? And the second one, very interesting one. In fact, I'm on the board of a company and we had a board meeting early this week, and one of the leaders was saying, we want to get women into leadership roles, but I'm facing a challenge. Women are not applying for these jobs, so it's difficult to get women from outside, and those who are internal are not putting their hands up for promotion. How can we actually make a change? And a lot of my work is in really answering this question. And this is from another client I'm working with who's looking to set up a GCC here, Global Capability Center in India, and the parent companies in the US. And one of the things they're grappling with is, people are not speaking up and being very assertive. The mindset my employees have is a little subservient to our counterparts. How do I change that? How do we integrate across cultures? How do I integrate employees who are different? And the last all-encompassing one, how do we respect uniqueness of each person while maintaining same standards? Now, there's no one big answer. There's no success formula for some of these questions. What we did when we spoke to a lot of leaders is look at, therefore, what are some critical qualities and what are some behaviors that leaders need to manage this very diverse, forever changing workforce to make them future ready for a future we know nothing about. So we have a model I call the ECHO model, which stands for empathy, courage, humility, and openness, as qualities and to some extent skills that leaders need to have to manage this workforce. I know we've all heard of empathy and everybody speaks about empathy. But when I run workshops where I actually teach empathy, we find it's very, very difficult to practice. Yet, employees want leaders to be empathetic, and this is from a Catalyst study. If leaders are empathetic, employees are more innovative, engaged, they will stay and they will manage this complex thing called life better. But it's not easy. What is empathy? Really having a connection from my mind to your mind, from my heart to your heart. And when I do work in these sessions, people are very surprised. They thought they were very empathetic, but they are not. I'll give you a simple scenario which we work with. Imagine a team member or a colleague comes to you and says, I'm having a really hard time, I'm going through a struggle. Honest, what's the first thought that comes to your mind? I hope you're not going to ask for leave. I hope you're not going to, goof off work. I hope you don't need this mental health day for yourself. We are human, we think that, but how do we respond? What do we say to that person who's saying, I'm having a hard time, I'm really struggling? And we saw a lot of this in the post-COVID world. Do you say, hey, you think you're having a hard time? Wait till I tell you about my hard time. That's not empathize, we call that minimize. Or you're having a hard time and struggling, oh my God, the world is not an easy place. Everything is terrible. That's what we call maximize. Or as a leader, do you say, here is why you're having a hard time. You just don't know how to prioritize. Then that's called analyze, and then we go on to what we all love to do, advice. Let me tell you what to do. But what people really want is empathy. It's just, can I listen? And as you can see, it's becoming more and more important to the extent very senior leaders want to learn, how can I be more empathetic? And more leaders, interestingly, are becoming coaches as well, so that they can listen and connect. Courage. Right? We know leaders need to be courageous, but this is a different kind of a courage, and I love this. It's called the serenity prayer, which says, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can. Inclusive leadership requires courage. Some of you might recognize the second picture. It's from a movie called Hidden Figures. I don't know if any of you have seen Hidden Figures. It's a fabulous picture, and of course it's about these group of colored women who work for NASA, and they face both racial discrimination as well as gender discrimination, to the extent they are not able to perform to their best. And one of the ladies talks about how long it takes her to get to the colored ladies' washroom, which is 40 minutes and in a different campus. So the leader, whom you can see, taking off that sign which says colored leaders only. The leader has to take a courageous moral stand and end a practice that has been going on for a long time. So he actually says no more separate washrooms and brings about the change to make things more inclusive and better. So that's courage. Courage is extremely important. Courage to be unpopular, courage to be disliked, which is not easy. So different from the courage to be bold, visionary, ambitious, this is deep moral courage required to be inclusive leaders. The third one is humility. So what you see is a senior VP who's a mentee and a junior employee who's a mentor. Right? And humility earlier was not connected to leadership. It was okay for leaders to be arrogant, tough, and in a way be the know-it-alls. But today you no longer have a leverage on knowledge. In fact, my daughter used to go to a school, I live in Gurgaon, and the motto of her school, which is Sri Ram School, was Vidya Dadati Vinayam, which is actually knowledge bestows humility. And today you can never have enough knowledge, so the leader has to be humble. And one of the leaders I was speaking to is the CEO of a very large media company, and she was saying, when she started work, this thing called digital marketing did not exist. She said, I'm a bit of a digital dinosaur. No amount of reading, how many ever YouTube videos I watch, I cannot master this digital world. So I go and spend time with the young people. I tell them, teach me. And it takes both courage and humility to learn from others. And if we don't learn, we're going to be obsolete as leaders. So humility and saying, I don't know, can you tell me, to people who may not be at the same power as you is so critical. Last one is openness. I love this quote. It's like mind is a parachute. It doesn't work unless it's open. So leaders have to be open. You cannot afford to be rigid. Things are changing. The solution that worked for you 2 years ago may not work for you today. So you have to be open to doing something which human beings hate doing, changing our mind. Right? So you have to say, yeah, I'm changing my mind and it's okay. In fact, Adam Grant has written a whole book called Think Again about how important it is to change your mind. So these are the 4 qualities. But more than just qualities, we need to see how these translate into behaviors. Now, I strongly believe leadership is not a theory. Leadership is not a very cool model or framework. It's nothing but a set of behaviors that you consciously practice on a day-to-day basis. So how do you know you have these qualities? It'll show up in your behavior. And we have a little list of behaviors. And I love, as you can see, I love all this echo and list. It just helps us to remember. What's the list? For inclusive leadership, listen to different points of view, invite all voices to share, support as an ally, and take the initiative. Sounds easy, sounds simple, but not easy to practice. In fact, in all the leadership development workshops that I do, the biggest takeaway for very senior leaders has been a module we do on listening. Can I listen without bias? Right? Some of you, because we are attending DEI, will be familiar with the word unconscious bias. We don't even know we are biased. And in fact, when I was running a session, one of the leaders said, now I realize. When I interview ladies between the ages of 25 to 35 for a position, I realize I don't really listen to them. Why? Because in my mind, I think they are a flight risk. In my vast experience, I've seen that these young women either get married or become mothers and they drop off. So when I'm interviewing them, back of my mind, I'm saying, they're not going to stay anyway. Let's move on quickly. And he never realized that he was doing this. So it impacted his ability to listen without judgment, without bias. And here's where empathy comes in. Can I truly listen? Can I deeply listen to another human being? And as we go up the ladder, the amount of time leaders need to spend listening actually becomes more. But what ineffective leaders do is to tell more instead of listening. And that is not going to work in the future. Right? Because you don't know what you don't know, and you can pick up a lot of things by just listening. And every leader we interviewed said, I take time out to listen. I do one-on-ones. I spend time just listening to people, and not just listening, but listening to different points of view, which could be very different from what you believe to be true. So listening is important. Inviting all voices to share. So the mindset you need is that of curiosity, not arrogance. It's like somebody, no matter who he or she or they are, can add value. So can I actively invite people to share? And some of you would have heard of this term psychological safety, right? You heard? Very popular these days, and it sounds like a fancy word, but what it just means is that, do I make it safe for people to share their ideas, to ask questions without being ridiculed, without being judged? And just because a person doesn't open his or her mouth, it doesn't mean they don't have anything to say. In fact, the 4 most powerful words a leader can use. Just think about it. 4 most powerful words. What do you think? Not, here is what I think. So when you invite people to share consciously, intentionally, you're giving space for new voices, new ideas, new thoughts, which is why you hire different people in the first place. Right? These days we use the term diversity candidate. I don't like that, but the idea is you want to hire people who are different, from different institutions, different gender, different background. And you want to do that because they bring a different perspective, but if you're not going to ask them to share, you will never get the advantage of that different perspective. So the qualities of openness and humility show up in, are you inviting people to share? And one of the senior leaders I coached actually said, I thought listening and asking people for their opinion is a sign of weakness. I thought as a leader, I was supposed to have all the answers. But that was before COVID, and COVID changed everything for this leader. So he got a boost in terms of his personal growth. So that's inviting. Supporting as an ally. We've heard this word very often. In fact, a lot of programs are there on allyship. What do we mean by an ally? Do I empower other people to take decisions? Do I give away a part of my job and say, I believe you are capable of taking this decision? And the second way you can be an ally is actually call out disrespect and bias, which takes a huge amount of courage. And I was talking to this friend of mine. He works in a large organization and is at a kind of a mid-level, and he said, during our lunch break and during some of these informal gossip sessions, I heard somebody refer to a group of people by a very derogatory name. And I thought I should correct him because I really didn't like the word that he used to describe these people. And they were people from a part of India, from the northeast of India. But I didn't want to make a fuss. I didn't want to stand out. But I didn't like it that he used this word. If you read Harry Potter, there's a scene where, any of you like Harry Potter, so I'm just going to use the reference where, this Dumbledore or somebody tells Neville, it takes courage to stand up to your enemies. It takes even more courage to stand up to your friends and call out disrespect and bias. But that's how you can be an ally to people who don't have a voice and who don't speak for themselves. So call out, be an ally, have conversations with them, vocally announce that you're an ally. So one of the clients I was working with said, we want to start a pride group, but nobody has come forward to be a member. But we've had lots of people who say, I'd like to be an ally, so if somebody wants to come out, we are there for them. So that's allyship. And the last is taking the initiative to institutionalize some practices to create an environment of belonging. I believe that if you're a leader, whether you're a CEO or a people leader, it's a position of privilege and power. And those of us who have it also have an obligation to make the change we want, create the change and be the change we want to bring about. And if you're a leader, you have that power. You can institutionalize certain practices. Right? And I read an interview with Leena Nair, who was the HR director of Unilever, and she said, within a month after I became HR director, I extended the maternity leave policy. I gave flexible work hours, not just to women, but to men as well. I was able to bring about a lot of changes when I reached that position. And it doesn't have to be a massive policy change. You can bring about changes at the workplace. Look around, think about what can I do to make a difference and make the place more inclusive, create a deeper sense of belonging. Right? So these are the behaviors that are needed to live the qualities of empathy, courage, humility, and openness. And as we move towards the future, right, as we move towards leading this diverse workforce, leadership is actually the ability to manage paradoxes, to manage complexities which look very, very different. So if I were to sum up, I would say, in a world where there is artificial intelligence, leaders need to become even more real and authentic. When we are dealing with chat GPT and chatbots, leaders need to have real life chats and conversations. And in a world where there are more and more robots at the workplace, leaders need to become more and more human. Okay, thank you, and that's time up.